Welcome to our channel where we dive deep into the powerful stories of the Bible and explore their timeless significance. Today we'll be discussing the captivating story of Esther, a story that has inspired people for generations. Esther's journey from a humble Jewish girl to the Queen of Persia is one filled with themes of courage, faith, divine timing, and how God works behind the scenes, even when his name isn't explicitly mentioned. At its heart, the story of Esther reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting with faith in the midst of it. Esther had to make difficult decisions, risk her life, and trust in God's divine plan to save her people. Her story teaches us about the importance of trusting God's timing and recognizing that we may be placed in certain positions for such a time as this. As we walk through Esther's journey, reflect on your own life. Where is God calling you to act with courage? How is he guiding you in ways that may not be immediately clear? Esther's story encourages us all to remain faithful, knowing that even when we don't see it, God is always working for our good. Stay tuned for a deeper look into the incredible story of Esther. We're excited to share with you the insights and lessons we can apply to our everyday lives. Do not forget to like this video and share it to others. The story of Esther is set during the reign of King Xerxes I, also known as Ahasuerus, who ruled the Persian Empire from 486 to 465 BC. This was one of the most powerful and expansive empires in the ancient world, stretching from India in the east to Ethiopia in the west, encompassing over 127 provinces. The empire was a hub of wealth, political power, and military might, with its capital in Susa, one of the great cities of the time. To grasp a better understanding of this story, it is important to understand what the Persian Empire was like under King Xerxes. Xerxes, a descendant of the famous King Cyrus, who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem, is often remembered as a powerful yet impulsive ruler. His empire was vast and diverse, containing people of various ethnicities, religions, and cultures. Xerxes inherited the throne from his father, Darius I, and maintained the empire's grandeur, which relied heavily on its strong central authority. The king held absolute power, but he also depended on his nobles and advisors to manage the far-reaching provinces of his empire. Persia's empire was known for its advanced governance and infrastructure. It had an efficient postal system, an extensive road network, and governors called satraps who administered each province. Xerxes himself was deeply involved in military campaigns, most famously against Greece during the Greco-Persian Wars. His reign was marked by both monumental achievements and significant losses, notably the defeat of his navy at the Battle of Salamis. The political environment of Persia was one of intrigue, where power struggles among nobles and advisors were common. The empire was a mosaic of cultures, and the king had to balance loyalty and governance over a multitude of regions with different needs and customs. Loyalty to the king was paramount, and anyone seen as a threat to the stability of the empire, including those in his own court, could face severe punishment. Persian society was hierarchical, with the king at the top, followed by a class of nobles, military leaders, and administrators. Beneath them were artisans, merchants, and laborers, while slaves and peasants were at the bottom. The royal court was the center of political power, and it was a place of great wealth, luxury, and influence. Banquets, such as the one described in the opening chapter of the Book of Esther, were lavish affairs designed to display the empire's wealth and the king's generosity. These events were also used to solidify alliances and demonstrate the king's supreme authority. Religion played a significant role in Persian life, with Zoroastrianism being the dominant faith. However, the empire was generally tolerant of other religions, including Judaism, as evidenced by King Cyrus's earlier decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland. The Jewish community in Persia during this time was a minority group, often keeping to themselves but also fully integrated into the broader society, as we see in the case of Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who held a position within the royal court. Despite this integration, Jews still faced potential threats of discrimination, as their identity and religious practices could be at odds with the majority culture. In Persian society, women were generally subordinate to men, and their roles were largely domestic. However, in the royal court, women could wield significant influence, especially if they were part of the king's harem or royal family. The queen in particular held a unique position. Though she was expected to be obedient and to serve the king, her role was also symbolic of the empire's wealth and power. The queen was often used as a political pawn in alliances, and her actions, whether in support or defiance of the king, could have far-reaching implications. Despite the grandeur associated with the royal women, they were still subject to the whims of the king and court. Their influence, though real, was often exercised behind the scenes. The story of Queen Vashti, the predecessor of Esther, exemplifies this delicate balance of power. The book of Esther opens with King Xerxes hosting a grand feast that lasts for 180 days, displaying his wealth and the splendor of his empire. At the end of this period, Xerxes holds a 7-day banquet for all the people in the citadel of Susa. During this time, Queen Vashti also hosts a banquet for the women of the palace. On the 7th day of the feast, King Xerxes, likely influenced by wine, commands Queen Vashti to appear before him and his guests wearing her royal crown to display her beauty. However, Vashti refuses the king's command. The Bible does not explain why she refused, but her defiance is significant. In Persian society, and especially within the context of the royal court, this act of refusal was a direct challenge to the king's authority. Xerxes is enraged, and his advisors suggest that if Vashti's disobedience goes unpunished, it could inspire other women in the empire to defy their husbands, potentially leading to widespread disorder. As a result, Vashti is deposed as queen, and a decree is sent throughout the empire, reinforcing the idea that every man should be the ruler of his household. This event sets the stage for Esther's rise, as Xerxes later seeks a new queen to take Vashti's place. Vashti's removal from the throne creates a vacancy in the royal household, and Xerxes' advisors propose holding a beauty contest to find a new queen. Young women from across the empire are brought to the palace, where they undergo a year-long preparation process before being presented to the king. Among them is Esther, a young Jewish woman raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther's rise to become queen is a story of divine providence, as she is placed in a position of influence just in time to save her people from destruction. The significance of Vashti's refusal and her subsequent dismissal cannot be overlooked. It highlights the fragility of a queen's position in the Persian court and the dangers of defying the king's commands. Yet it also opens the door for Esther, whose courage and faith will ultimately transform her into a hero for her people. Now let's talk about the star of the story. Who was Esther really? Esther, also known by her Hebrew name Hadassah, is one of the most compelling figures in the Bible, a Jewish girl living in exile in Persia who rose to become queen and played a pivotal role in saving her people. Her story is a testament to courage, faith, humility, and divine timing, showing how God can use anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, to fulfill his greater plans. Esther was born into a Jewish family living in exile in Persia. Her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means myrtle, a symbol of righteousness in Jewish culture. However, she is better known by her Persian name, Esther, which may derive from the Persian word for star or from the name of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. This duality in her name reflects her unique position as a Jewish woman living in a foreign land, caught between two identities and cultures. The Jewish people had been living in exile since the Babylonian captivity, when King Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed the first temple in Jerusalem and took the Jews into exile. Even though King Cyrus of Persia allowed many Jews to return to their homeland after conquering Babylon, a significant number of Jews remained in Persia, where they had established their lives. Esther and her cousin Mordecai were among those who stayed. The book of Esther does not provide much detail about her early life, but we know that she was orphaned as a young girl. Her parents died, and she was raised by her cousin Mordecai, a Jewish man who worked within the Persian administration in the citadel of Susa. Mordecai was a figure of wisdom, faith, and loyalty to both his people and his God. He became not just a guardian to Esther, but a mentor, guiding her in the ways of faith and helping her navigate the complexities of living as a Jew in a foreign land. Mordecai played a crucial role in shaping Esther's character. Despite their status as exiles, Mordecai ensured that Esther remained faithful to her Jewish heritage. He instilled in her the values of humility, obedience, and trust in God. Mordecai's guidance was essential in preparing Esther for the role she would later play in the Persian court. Living as Jews in exile came with challenges. The Jews were a minority group in the vast Persian Empire, and although they were allowed to practice their religion, they were still vulnerable to prejudice and persecution. Mordecai's life as a Jew in the royal court was a delicate balancing act, one that required wisdom and discernment. Esther, growing up under his tutelage, would have learned how to navigate these complex dynamics. Esther's rise to queenship is a powerful moment in the Bible, filled with divine orchestration and significant meaning. Esther's appointment as Queen of Persia is not just the culmination of a beauty pageant or a fortunate event, but the unfolding of a much larger, divinely ordained plan. As a young Jewish woman living in a foreign land, Esther's elevation to such a prestigious role underlines themes of providence, faith, and courage, showing how God can work through unlikely circumstances to achieve his purposes. When King Xerxes deposed Queen Vashti for her refusal to obey his command, he initiated a search for a new queen. Young women from all over the empire were brought to the palace and placed under the care of Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the king's harem. These women underwent a year-long beauty treatment, after which they would be presented to the king, who would choose his new queen. Out of all the women in the empire, Esther was the one who stood out to both Hegai and King Xerxes. Several qualities made her unique and worthy of the position of queen. One of these qualities was her beauty. The Bible mentions in the book of Esther chapter 2 verse 7 that Esther was lovely in form and features. Her physical beauty certainly played a role in catching the attention of the king. However, it was not just her outward appearance that set her apart. The Persian Empire was vast and diverse, and many beautiful women were brought to the king's harem. Esther's beauty went beyond the superficial. Another quality worthy of note was Esther's humility, which shone through in how she conducted herself during the selection process. She did not demand special treatment or flaunt her beauty. Instead, she followed the advice of Hegai, the eunuch, who quickly took a liking to her and gave her special favor. Esther's willingness to listen and her modesty distinguished her from the other women vying for the king's attention. Esther's character and inner strength were perhaps her most defining traits. Even though she was thrust into the royal court, away from her family and community, she remained steadfast in her faith and values. Esther's composure, grace, and integrity made her stand out not only to the king, but to everyone who came into contact with her. She possessed a quiet strength, which would later be revealed in her courage to confront the king and expose Haman's plot. Esther's respect for authority and her obedience, particularly toward Mordecai, played a significant role in her rise to queen. Even after becoming queen, she continued to listen to Mordecai and seek his advice. Her humility in accepting guidance from those around her showed a level of maturity and wisdom that set her apart from the other women in the palace. Though the book of Esther never explicitly mentions God, Esther's faith is evident in her actions. When faced with the threat of annihilation, she called for a fast among the Jewish people, showing her reliance on prayer and divine intervention. Esther's faith in God's providence and her courage to act on that faith is what ultimately saved her people. Esther's humility is evident throughout her story. When she was taken to the royal palace as part of the search for a new queen, she did not flaunt her beauty or status. Instead, she followed the advice of Hegai, the royal eunuch in charge of the women, and won his favor through her demeanor and humility. The moment Esther is chosen as queen is a pivotal point in her story. From an outsider's perspective, it may seem like a stroke of good fortune or random chance. However, for those who understand the underlying spiritual significance, it is clear that God's hand was guiding this event. Esther's rise to power was no accident. It was a divinely orchestrated part of a much bigger plan. Even after becoming queen, Esther remained humble and loyal to Mordecai. She did not let her position of power cloud her judgment or lead her to forget her people. Esther's appointment as queen was significant for many reasons, both politically and spiritually. As a Jewish woman living in a foreign land, her rise to power was unprecedented. She was an outsider in almost every sense, ethnically, religiously, and socially. Yet, through God's providence, she found herself in the highest position of influence in the Persian Empire, second only to King Xerxes. For the Jewish people, Esther's rise to power symbolized hope. At the time, Jews were a minority living in exile, often facing discrimination and threats to their existence. The fact that one of their own could become Queen of Persia was remarkable. It served as a reminder that, despite their circumstances, God had not abandoned them. Instead, he was working behind the scenes, placing Esther in a position where she could eventually save her people from destruction. Esther's rise to queenship also carried personal significance. She was no longer just Hadassah, a young Jewish girl living in exile. She was now Esther, Queen of Persia, with the power to influence the most powerful man in the empire. This shift in her identity and status reflected a transformation in her role and responsibilities. She had to balance her new position in the royal court with her loyalty to her people and her faith in God. As queen, Esther had a unique opportunity to use her influence for a greater purpose, one that would soon be revealed. Esther's appointment as queen was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a much larger, divinely orchestrated plan. Unbeknownst to her at the time, her rise to power was part of God's plan to save the Jewish people from annihilation. Soon after Esther became queen, a new threat emerged in the form of Haman, an official in the Persian court who harbored deep hatred for the Jews, particularly Mordecai, Esther's cousin. Haman manipulated King Xerxes into issuing a decree that would allow the destruction of all the Jews in the Persian Empire. The Jewish people faced certain doom, and it seemed that nothing could stop the king's order. However, Esther's position as queen placed her in a unique position to intervene. Mordecai, understanding the gravity of the situation, urged Esther to speak to the king on behalf of her people. At first, Esther was hesitant. Approaching the king without being summoned was a crime punishable by death, even for the queen. However, Mordecai's words in the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 14, challenged her to see the bigger picture. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? This statement highlights the divine purpose behind Esther's rise to power. Her appointment as queen was not just for her benefit, it was part of God's plan to save his people. Mordecai's plea pushed Esther to recognize the responsibility that came with her new position. Though the risk was great, she chose to act in faith. Esther called for a fast among the Jewish people, demonstrating her reliance on prayer and divine guidance. Then she courageously approached the king and exposed Haman's plot, ultimately saving her people from destruction. Esther's story illustrates how God can use unlikely people and circumstances to fulfill his purposes. At the beginning of the story, Esther was an orphaned Jewish girl living in exile, with little power or influence. Yet by the end, she was Queen of Persia, a position that allowed her to save an entire nation. Esther's rise to power was not about her personal ambition or desire for status. It was about God's greater plan for his people. What makes Esther's appointment so significant is the way she embraced her role as a vessel for God's plan. Despite the risks and the uncertainty, she chose to act in faith, trusting that God had placed her in that position for a reason. Esther's courage and obedience allowed her to be used by God in a mighty way. Her story is a reminder that God's plans often involve ordinary people who are willing to act in faith. Esther was not a trained leader or a prophet, yet she played a crucial role in the salvation of her people. Her rise to power shows that God can use anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, to achieve his purposes. Now let us delve into some beautiful lessons to learn from this story. One of the most significant lessons from Esther's story is the importance of trusting in divine timing and waiting for the right moment. Throughout her rise to queenship and her eventual role in saving the Jewish people, Esther displayed patience and discernment. Though she was placed in a position of influence, she did not rush to reveal her Jewish identity or to use her status hastily. Instead, Esther waited for the right moment to act, guided by wisdom and trust in God's plan. Esther's decision to wait until the appropriate time to approach King Xerxes about Haman's plot against the Jews demonstrates her faith in God's timing. After learning of the decree that would destroy her people, she could have immediately rushed into the king's presence to plead her case. However, she chose to fast for 3 days and asked the Jewish people to fast alongside her, seeking divine guidance before making her move. Esther's patience and trust in God allowed her to approach the situation with clarity and wisdom. In our lives, it can be challenging to wait on God's timing, especially when faced with urgent or pressing issues. Esther's story reminds us that rushing ahead without seeking God's guidance can lead to missed opportunities or disastrous outcomes. Trusting in divine timing means exercising patience and faith, believing that God knows the right moment to act. Esther's faithfulness in this regard allowed her to fulfill her role in God's greater plan for her people. Esther's story also highlights the power of courage, particularly when faced with difficult and dangerous circumstances. After Mordecai urged her to speak to the king on behalf of the Jewish people, Esther was faced with a life-threatening choice. Approaching the king without being summoned could result in her execution, yet the fate of her people rested on her willingness to take that risk. In the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 16, we see her bravery shine through when she says, "If I perish, I perish." With those words, Esther demonstrated the depth of her courage, understanding the risks involved, but choosing to act out of love for her people and obedience to God's calling. Her courage in the face of possible death not only saved the Jewish people, but also revealed her deep trust in God's protection. Esther's boldness teaches us that true courage often involves stepping out in faith, even when the outcome is uncertain or the cost is high. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the decision to act in spite of it. When we are called to take a stand for what is right or to face adversity head-on, we can draw strength from Esther's example, knowing that God honors those who act in faith and courage. Another key lesson from Esther's story is the reminder that God works through the least expected to fulfill his purposes. Esther's background as a Jewish girl in exile, raised by her cousin Mordecai, did not suggest she would one day become queen of the most powerful empire in the world. Yet God orchestrated her rise to queenship as part of his divine plan to save his people. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of God using unlikely individuals to accomplish great things. David, the shepherd boy who became king. Moses, the stammering prophet who led Israel out of Egypt. And Esther, an orphaned exile who became queen. Esther's story illustrates that God does not choose based on outward appearances, status, or qualifications. Instead, he chooses people based on their willingness to trust and obey him. God's providence is evident throughout Esther's story, from her selection as queen to her strategic position in the king's court at the right time to intervene on behalf of the Jewish people. Even though God's name is not explicitly mentioned in the book of Esther, his hand is clearly at work behind the scenes, guiding events to fulfill his purposes. This is a powerful reminder that God is always working, even when we cannot see it. For us today, Esther's story encourages us to recognize that God can use anyone, regardless of their background, to fulfill his plans. We may feel unqualified or insignificant, but God has a purpose for each of us. Our role is to be faithful, trusting that he will work through us in ways we may not yet understand. Finally, Esther's story teaches us the importance of using our influence and position for a greater purpose. Esther was placed in a position of power as queen, but her role was not merely for her own benefit or comfort. Mordecai's famous words to Esther, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" remind us that the positions and opportunities we are given are part of a bigger plan. Esther could have easily chosen to remain silent, avoiding danger and continuing to enjoy the comforts and privileges of her royal position. Yet she recognized that her role as queen was not meant for her own benefit, but for the greater good of her people. Esther understood that her position was divinely orchestrated to fulfill a larger purpose, one that involved risking her own life to save the Jewish people from impending destruction. Her decision to act courageously, despite the personal risks, highlights a profound sense of duty and commitment. By embracing her role and using her influence for a higher purpose, Esther demonstrated that true leadership involves selflessness and a willingness to sacrifice for the well-being of others. Her actions remind us that positions of power and privilege come with responsibilities, and that God can use us in extraordinary ways when we align our actions with his greater plan. In our lives, we may find ourselves in positions of influence, whether in our careers, communities, or personal relationships. Esther's story challenges us to consider how we are using that influence. Are we using our positions for selfish gain, or are we using them to serve others and fulfill God's purposes? Just as Esther used her position to save her people, We are called to use our influence for the greater good, seeking to make a positive impact in the world around us. The story of Esther holds deep significance for modern-day Christians, offering timeless lessons on faith, courage, wisdom, and obedience. Her story resonates with believers today because it reflects the transformative power of trusting in God, even when His plans are unclear. Esther's faith and courage in the face of personal risk are qualities that Christians can strive to embody in their daily lives. Esther's story remains relevant for those in positions of influence today. Whether in government, business, or ministry, leaders can learn from her example of using power responsibly and for the greater good. Esther recognized that her queenship was not for her own benefit, but to fulfill a divine purpose. Similarly, modern leaders are called to use their influence for positive change, to advocate for justice, and to uplift those who are marginalized. Esther's story challenges leaders to reflect on the impact they can have on their communities and the world. Her legacy serves as a powerful reminder that positions of influence are not merely privileges, but gifts from God, accompanied by a profound responsibility to serve others and advance His kingdom. Leaders who embody Esther's courage, faith, and wisdom are empowered to make significant and positive changes within their spheres of influence. Just as Esther's actions transformed the fate of her people, today's leaders are called to harness their positions to uplift, guide, and bring about meaningful progress in their communities and beyond. Esther's story is more than a historical account. It is a powerful testament to faith, courage, and divine calling. Her legacy continues to inspire and resonate with Christians today, offering invaluable lessons on trusting God, standing up for what is right, and using our positions for a greater purpose. Esther's bravery in risking her life to save her people is a reminder that God often calls us to step out in faith, even when the risks are great. Her story encourages believers to act courageously, trusting that God will work through their efforts, no matter how daunting the circumstances. Esther's faith is another crucial aspect of her legacy. She trusted in God's timing and providence, even when she could not see the full picture. Her decision to wait, fast, and pray before approaching the king demonstrates the importance of seeking divine guidance before acting. This aspect of her life encourages Christians to trust in God's plan, especially during moments of uncertainty. Her story also teaches us the importance of recognizing the influence we hold, no matter how small or great it may seem. Esther's queenship was part of a divine plan to protect the Jewish people, and she used her position to fulfill that purpose. Similarly, we are all placed in positions of influence in our lives, whether in our families, workplaces, or communities. Esther's story challenges us to reflect on how we can use our influence to serve others and advance God's purposes. As we reflect on Esther's legacy, we are invited to examine our own journeys of faith and purpose. Esther's story stands as a powerful reminder that God can work through anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, to fulfill His divine plans. Her unwavering faith, extraordinary courage, and deep obedience highlight qualities that we too can strive to embody in our own lives. Esther's journey inspires us to trust in divine timing, act boldly in the face of challenges, and use our influence for a greater purpose. Let her example motivate us to live with integrity and dedication in all that we do. Take some time to reflect on the areas where God may be calling you to step out in faith. How can you use your influence to make a positive impact? Are there moments in your life where you need to trust in God's timing, as Esther did? As you ponder these questions, let Esther's story inspire you to act with courage, faith, and wisdom, trusting that God is at work in your life, just as He was in Esther's. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the incredible story of Esther. Your engagement and support mean the world to us, and we hope that Esther's courage, faith, and wisdom have inspired you as much as they've inspired us. If you found this story meaningful, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. How has Esther's story impacted your life? What lessons are you taking away from her journey? Your feedback helps us continue to create content that resonates with and uplifts our community. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and insights. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on our latest content, including more deep dives into powerful biblical narratives and practical lessons for everyday living. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, keep walking in faith, embracing the lessons from the stories we share, and reflecting on your own journey of purpose and impact. See you in our next video.